And to discuss all of the related issues here, we're joined in the studio by Ruth Wasserman Lande, the columnist on Arab affairs at Maariv newspaper and a former member of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we're also joined here in the studio by our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, to get more perspective on all of the events that we're seeing playing out. And Ruth, as we're waiting here for this delegation to disembark from the plane, I think the doors have not yet opened here. Let's talk about just exactly, we were discussing this right before we came on air. This, in a way, the shocking but genuine, apparently truly genuine peace being offered or extended to Israel from the United Arab Emirates here, from the top down, the bottom up. It seems one after another op-ed emerging from the Emirates here, talking about just how genuine, how warm this peace is, how open they are to these relations with Israel. What are you hearing from your counterparts in the Emirates?
It seems that this is going to be a real people-to-people agreement, quite something that we're not used to. Coming from the very top leadership, they are very much, I think they've decided to really do it right. So the textbooks have been changed, the green light has been given to create kosher restaurants, to have the shalom and welcome sign at their airport. And it trickles down. And we shouldn't forget also that this is a very multicultural society. I mean, the Emiratis are very much used to very many different cultures. They're very open, they're very receiving. But this is really unbelievably warm and apparently very genuine. And
these are changes, as you mentioned, textbooks, a lot of the cultural suddenly seemingly shifting in favor of these open relations with Israel. I'm sure not everyone, but obviously a majority of the people there. Now, these are changes that we've been, in a way, conditioned or led to believe would have to take generations to occur, or long periods of time to slowly melt away the long-standing stigmas and perceptions around the Middle East. What's your analysis or interpretation of why this is happening so fast with the UAE?
Well, first of all, don't forget that the UAE approximately 50 years ago was in a completely different a state of appearance, at least. What they have done and their leadership has done in 50 years is remarkable. They have literally changed the desert into a flourishing a Garden of Eden, nothing less than that. And for the people who have done something like that so fast and so impressively, I think a change of perception is also a possibility.
Part of their culture, part of their country.
Part of the country, part of the culture, but I think also between the lines for a while, Israel has not been a word that is not allowed to be said. So the Israelis, the business people, it's all been there, but it was quieter. It was in a much lower profile. And now it's all out in the light and permitted, so to speak.
Common concerns on the security front, but Ruth, as the ambassador and Jonathan Regev here talking about, there's a lot of mutual benefits seeming to come out of this. It's not just about security threats, as the ambassador is highlighting. There's appearing to be a wide range of mutually beneficial relations to be formed here now. And do you expect that to be just wide-ranging now that we see the nature of how this is emerging?
I think that there is a very big call by the leadership of the UAE, and that sort of vibrates throughout the region. I do believe that this will be followed by other countries very shortly, of progress, of prosperity, of taking that understanding that we have mutual enemies and not too much against one another, having understood that the Palestinian issue has not been put aside completely and will be addressed, but it will not hold hostage the prosperity and the progress, and then checking together what are the mutual interests and how do we go forward. I think that there's a huge openness to technology, to finding mutual solutions in the, in the field of medicine, to looking at food security. They have a minister for food security, which is quite amazing and quite forward-looking, strategic. So strategic thought and regional cooperation, anything is a possibility, although strategic cooperation on the security level in coalitions in our region have not proved themselves yet, but I believe that they will now that the two strong partners, Israel and the UAE, have come on board together.
Still in the studio here with Ruth Wasserman Lande here, and I know, Ruth, we both Got emotional hearing the words of the Emirati finance minister here. This is surreal and speaks to the truly concrete details that they've hashed out already. The real plans in place. This isn't political rhetoric. He's talking about double taxation. They're talking about visas. This is, from all appearances, a truly all-encompassing set of relations being established.
This is something that has been very, very thoroughly thought out. The objectives are very clear.
Our second agreement. I ask, please, the Minister of State to remain where he is. We need
signing all the agreements as we speak.
Yes, I'm just looking
on Israel's Minister for Science and Technology,
Yizhar Shai.
Again, speaking to the wide-ranging nature of the types of agreements coming in here
we
from
are now
science and
signing
technology.
an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding on cooperation in science and innovation.
What is astounding is the very thorough work that they've done behind the scenes. You know, the Emirati minister came very well prepared, very non-political, so to speak, comments. And very concrete statements about what it is that they are seeking to promote in MENA. Also, the announcement about the Abraham Fund is
$3 billion.
Astounding in terms of the concreteness of not having this just an MOU or an agreement,
but the money's behind it.
But to really make this happen and to serve as a model for emulation for other nations. If I may
it's
just...
a huge carrot being held out in front of these other nations, right? They're considering perhaps a similar signing ceremony in the tarmac at Tel Aviv.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
You know, perhaps we should...
Minister of State, can I kindly ask...
Which one now? Let's see.
And join the Prime Minister and the Secretary.
As you mentioned, they clearly did come prepared here as the documents all lined up.
We are now going to sign an agreement on aviation.
Wow.
Aviation.
Signing for the Israeli government will be Her Excellency Miri Regev, the Minister of Transport and Road Safety. And signing for the UAE government, His Excellency Abdullah bin Taouk Al-Mari, the Minister of Economy.
You know what is amazing? That the Abraham Fund is going to put a huge amount of money in renewing the passages, the checkpoints, and they've made sure to mention that along with engines of growth and so on in the region. And that is just to sort of mention to the Palestinians, you know, you're not only not forgotten, but this is definitely going to be a part and parcel of this entire package. And I think it would be interesting to also look at the Arab-Israeli constituency and differently, if I may say.
Rejected this, I should say. They did not sign on to this peace agreement.
I would not say that the constituency did not sign on, but rather the MKs or the members of Knesset, their political representatives in the Knesset, who seemingly went and opposed the deal, much like the leadership in the Palestinian territories and
totally
Abu Mazen.
With the Palestinian Authority
Absolutely. You know,
Ministers, thank you so very much.
A political leader.
And our final agreement for today on visa exemptions, signing for the Israeli government, Professor Shlomo Mor Yosef, the Director General of the Population and Immigration.
The most important,
Authority.
I would say.
And signing for the UAE side, His Excellency Mr. Omar Gobash Al-Mari, Assistant Minister for Culture, Public Diplomacy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation.
You know, it's unbelievable. We don't even have a visa exemption with the U.S. And the Gulf, in the Gulf region, outside of the Gulf region, the UAE has no visa exemption as well with any country. Wow. So it's quite astounding that it's all out. It's an all-out agreement. There's a strategic decision here by all sides to certainly be a model for emulation, which is amazing. I wanted to mention before we spoke about the Palestinian leadership, not in Ramallah, but rather the MKs, the members of Knesset of the Arab-Israeli constituency within Israel. And Ayman Order interviewed to El Midan recently, saying that they completely disagree with this agreement and they voted against it because for some reason there is an attempt to try and convince them that Iran is the enemy. And that is quite astounding to me because quite ununderstandable to which constituency he was actually speaking when he represents the Sunni constituency within Israel, who does not, by and large, think like that at all in any way, and they rather look at this agreement as an opportunity.
Not leaving the airport based on coronavirus concerns, but a side note truly on today's historic moment here. And we're just speaking in the studio with Ruth still again about this non-visa travel here, at least not prearranged visas necessary to travel between the countries. And the greater meaning behind this, not just meaning, but the concrete effects of this as well. I mean, this is something not seen in decades already of quote-unquote peaceful relations with immediate neighbors of Israel. So what does this mean? And, what's the greater effect that this will have?
Visa exemption is a huge thing. Not checking, we say, in Hebrew, the tzitziyot, every single detail of the person who wants to come to the country, whether a business person or a tourist, is cutting bureaucracy in a way that is unbelievable. And I think that this is symbolic of very simple decision. We're going to really make this an unprecedented, warm, working deal. And you could hear that with the words that the Emirati minister, the head of the delegation from the UAE, spoke. He was so concrete. This was not blah, 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 let's sign an MOU agreement. This was, we are going to make this work. All of the players, all of the role players, the stakeholders in this deal are in with their arms and legs. $3 billion with the Abraham Fund. This is unreal.
Staggering amount.
So the visa exemption.
The things in place, the money in place.
Unbelievable. This is, honestly, I am, as somebody who lived in Egypt for 3 years, we have a strategic, important, unbelievable agreement with the Republic of Egypt for over 40 years.
It's hard to overstate how important that's been for both countries.
Absolutely, unbelievably important. And yet the people are worlds apart. There is no people to people. The peace is cold. However positively or optimistically you look at things. And this is a completely different ball game. This is, we're going to really make this happen. Much like, I would say, the practice in the UAE with pretty much everything. We're going to do this 1,000%, not 99. And it's impressive, it's touching, it's quite frankly unprecedented in this region, at least.
Truly awe-inspiring to so many Israelis that we were chatting that have just been conditioned that this was a reality that wouldn't likely play out. It's certainly not overnight, seemingly, as seemingly the crown jewel in this whole diplomatic initiative. But we heard that the head of the Abraham Fund there also talk about Morocco, maybe just throwing that reference out there. But he mentioned other countries to come, mentioned Morocco again, a lot of speculation about Morocco. What do you know from your journalist circles? What are the next countries to come?
I think it's not an issue of which particular country it's going to be. I think that the fact that Saudi Arabia has made it quite clear that it is behind everything that is happening. Perhaps it has not yet come out and said, we are going to sign a peace agreement. I would believe that they would need a little bit more meat, so to speak, vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And this is happening in between the lines and under the surface. I have no doubt about it, because it's for the, the benefit of the entire region and everybody and all the people within it. But they have given their backing to this entire play out. And this means, as the ambassador has said, a symbolic change. This is game-changing. It's not a small thing. It's not one little country needing a specific interest taken care of. It's not just Sudan needing to be taken off the list of the terrorist supporting countries. It's not just the F-35s. It's a strategic move, meditated, consulted, thought about, well thought about, and well calculated strategically, regionally, with the backing of a number of countries, Saudi Arabia included. I believe that Morocco is in a difficult position. It would take more time, and yet it will hop on the train. And if you ask me, You haven't yet, but if you ask me, the Palestinians do.
Great prediction here, obviously, and would be the biggest deal for Israelis, obviously. Yes, this is all hugely impactful, the deals being signed now, but nothing stands to be more impactful than truly, as you mentioned, opening up people-to-people peaceful relations with the Palestinians, as we've had before here in the region. I want to bring up another aspect here, and to bring in maybe the side of some of the cynics looking in at this now. There's major political moments, Ambassador, in both the United States and Israel. The specter of elections, concrete in the United States, now just weeks away, but also hanging over our heads in Israel once again here. How much of this is politics? I know that clearly these are concrete deals. These have been well thought out, and I'm not among those cynics, but what do you say to them who are looking in and talking about this as just a building political capital? You could argue that Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking twice at the podium today and leaving Foreign Minister Ashkenazi from a rival party sitting in his chair may have been a political calculation.
Well, I think it's from a political point of view right now, it's much more important for the political landscape in the United States, given that almost 2 weeks from now we have elections. And I think it's no coincidence that the Trump campaign has asked the debate commission to include foreign policy in the next debate, something that was absent in the first debate and was not really much discussed in this campaign. I think it would be to the advantage of Trump to discuss this, and quite frankly, rightly so. And I believe that historians looking back at this era, they will talk about the pre-Trump and after-Trump Middle East.
Your thoughts on that, the political moment that inescapable, really, in Israel and certainly in the United States, who's putting all the weight behind this?
I'll just say it very simply. Politicians remain politicians. And I did not yet have the privilege to meet a politician without interests. And so what? As long as the region receives peace, as long as there is the end of the unbelievable hostility, the education for hatred, which I myself was, I witnessed this firsthand in an Arab country, not because people are born to hate, but because they're educated for so many decades. The fact that this is going to move away, not everything is rosy, not everything is perfect. Of course, there are those who are against this, even in the UAE. In every place, even in Israel. But the fact that this is an opening, so if a politician stands behind it and there are interests to be gained, ahlan wa sahlan.
Well, they have the pen in their hand and the paper in front of them, so they have an important role, these politicians, as much as sometimes we don't like it. But yes, obviously this is an incredible day and certainly a stack of achievements here, as the ambassador mentions, for the Trump administration, for Netanyahu.
If you allow me to say one thing, sure. And that's really from the bottom of my heart, I would scream it out if I could. Alf Mabruk and Mazal Tov to our people. This is really a gift. That's how I see it.
It's an opportunity in a moment that, as the ambassador highlighted, the pre-Trump or after-Trump, however it's referred, it's a turning of a major page in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
In the studio with Ruth Wasserman Lande here. I'd love to get your thoughts on any of the follow-up to the political comments from the ambassador, but also I know you have your finger to the pulse of the issues around the greater Middle East. Turmoil almost in every direction you look. How big of a factor is that? We talk about Iran, but maybe they're involved in a lot of the turmoil. But the issue of Iran specifically aside, how has this greater turmoil or upheaval that we've seen over the last decade perhaps also brought these sides together?
Obviously, this has a huge impact. I mean, the Middle East has been shifting. I think one of the proofs of this has been the very unprecedented answer that the Palestinians got in the Arab League very recently. In fact, they were so used to decade after decade coming to the Arab League, and despite the fact that everybody in the Arab League completely disagreed with one another, on the surface of things, they seemingly agreed on one thing, and that is the anti-Israel sentiment. And yet, here came the Palestinians and asked the Arab League to dismantle this very agreement, and they were given a very, very remarkably embarrassing answer: no. And this perhaps is maybe an epitome of the changing times. There is an interest-based thinking for the first time, rather than, brotherhood, pan-Arabism. It's not that it's no longer there, but it's taken a back seat. And the region needs uplifting. There is so much there are no words to describe the difficulty, the lives that are being lost, the hunger, the poverty, the wars. Look at Syria. Look at what is happening in Lebanon. This is so close to us, and yet worlds apart. Where is this going to take us? Is Iran going to be the determining force? And I think that Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, countries like, of course, the UAE and the Gulf in general have understood they do not want the region in its entirety to go that way. And they've made their stand. They've made their point. Of course, this has played out regionally in terms of the strategic makeup of which direction are we taking, the pragmatic one or going down